I will go out on a limb. I think it stands to be the world of designing a road. I think the design space is already heading in a very fundamentally different direction that is emerging, that is happening. And so I would suggest that the door is open in that space to not simply embrace the digital delivery concept, but that AI could be a useful means to help evaluate lots of different options or alternatives, which so much of that world is called upon to evaluate.
Welcome to At the Intersection. I'm your host, Jim Anderson, and today I'm joined by John Hibbard, the Deputy Chief Engineer for the Georgia Department of Transportation. John also serves as the co-chair of GDOT's AI Steering Committee and is a great person to provide insight on how at least one DOT is thinking about AI adoption. Welcome to the show, John.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
All right, John, so let's begin with a lightning round. I want to keep things moving quickly here, and so I'm just going to ask you 5 questions, and I want you to give me 5 really quick responses here. So number 1, what's the favorite place travel has taken you to this year, or last year, I guess, 2025?
Wow, okay. That work has taken me to?
Anyway, yeah, favorite place at all?
Well, the favorite place was the late fall, early winter cruise on the Rhine that we did.
Very
that
nice.
was kind of,
okay.
That was pretty cool.
The Rhine.
Yeah.
All right. How about a title of a good book you read last year?
I finally got around to Fahrenheit 451.
Excellent. Okay. At what age did you know you wanted to work in transportation?
It took me, it was my senior year in high school. It was either transportation or music.
Excellent. Okay. That's its own interesting conversation. What's your favorite hobby outside of work?
It involves music somehow.
It involves music. Excellent. Yeah. And finish this sentence. AI is blank.
AI is something that can be very helpful to us.
Let's dive into that. It can be very helpful. So let's talk about technology. Obviously, AI is technology. You and I have talked a lot about technology, and you've seen technology cycles come and go in transportation. What's different about AI this time?
AI to me is a bit different, and yeah, I have seen cycles kind of come and go, but they were much more tightly focused, at least as I experienced them in my world. AI to me is broader, and it stands to touch different aspects of transportation, obviously in different ways, and that's, to me, is one of the challenges as I look at AI and where's it going and is it succeeding, and wherever it's going, it stands to touch all of us in so many different ways, personally, yeah, but also professionally. And so I think that makes it more difficult to kind of handicap where is it going, and much less how well will it do whatever it does.
Interesting. So I'm thinking, like, in the world of operations, which obviously you spent a good chunk of your career in, technology, traffic signals, intelligent transportation solutions, it's probably an oversimplification to say that's where the lion's share of the technology innovation had been occurring, or it's a good chunk of it. I don't know if it's a lion's share or not. Designing and building, obviously there's technology used in construction, there's technology used in CAD and those kinds of things, but maybe not moving as quickly. Is that a fair inference? Is that, ITS and that kind of operations technology was moving at one pace, and the technology used to design and build things maybe was not moving as quickly?
I think so. And I say it that way because, as you correctly said, I've spent so much of my career in the operations side of things. And so my knowledge of the design part is kind of like looking over the fence at that side and kind of musing over how that is accomplished. And so my view of that is a little bit different. It appears to move at a somewhat more deliberate pace. Yep. The operations side always seems to be impacted by the latest and greatest gadget, oftentimes. But more recently, it's not been so much gadgets, although there certainly is plenty of that going around. It has been data, and then more recently, AI.
Okay. So you've done a nice job of helping us elevate. We're not just talking operations, we're talking DOT wide. What would you say DOT leadership broadly is either overestimating or underestimating about AI today?
I think so many leaders in industries are struggling to assess the reality of AI's capabilities. What can it do now? And kind of putting a face on that, and that sounds weird because it's not a face. But what can it do that I can understand? It helps me, an executive, a DOT leader in this context, or it helps our staff in some other context. I think it's somewhat challenging to put a face on it.
That leads to my next question, which is what's the most useful AI capability you've personally seen deployed that is actually real, not just sort of arm wavy, hey, this is a cool future? What have you seen that's really good today?
I am seeing a use of an AI tool that helps an employee navigate roles, policies, or procedures. Different organizations call them different things, to the end of helping them do their job, answer questions. What I'm talking about here is a tool that our TMC operators can use when they are confronted with an incident out on the roads that they may puzzle over exactly what the best response is. And to be more specific, our operators do a great job of dealing with so many different types of incidents out there, multiple car accidents, car versus truck accidents, even some that sound quite spectacular, the overturned tractor trailer type accident. And they do those things, they handle those things so well, which I think is somewhat born out of the fact that they're dealing with them frequently in Georgia's roads. However, there are certainly odd wrinkles that happen or that can be part of incidents. And consequently, they're just not things that the operators deal with frequently. And so this tool that I'm speaking of, it goes by the name TMC React, is a means by which they can navigate our standard operating procedures and can give them suggestions, recommendations, advice perhaps, as to how should we respond to an incident.
And it's interesting. Thank you for that specific example. And I'm thinking, so many of the conversations around AI end up being around data, and you've got to get your data curated and high quality data, garbage in, garbage out, all of those kinds of things that we've all talked about. But what you're talking about, I guess the technical description is unstructured data. The more colloquial description is words, right? It's just a bunch of documents, right? A bunch of PDF documents. And you've heard me make this joke before. It's the year 2026 now. We're supposed to have flying cars by now, but instead we get PDF documents and Control F to navigate our way through. And I bet everybody listening to this, oh yeah, I used Control F just this morning to navigate a PDF document. And it feels very primitive for where we should be with technology, and applying that specifically to a TMC operator who has hundreds, if not thousands, of pages of unstructured data that is really just text. A very practical example makes total sense.
I think that we are in this situation where the guidelines that we're directing these individuals to follow are just a pile of text. And when something new is added, some new rule, some new procedure, some new situation, it's not carefully integrated into that existing pile of text. It's just added.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just one more thing. And it's funny. You sort of, okay, I got a new procedure. What do you send an email out to everybody and let them know that, edit number 2184 has been made to this document, right? But govern yourself accordingly, right? Yeah. So good example of focusing down on a very tactical use case. So let me ask you this, because you can't have that until you can procure that. And we all know that procurement's a big challenge in public agencies. What, from your perspective and from a procurement standpoint, what makes AI harder or different than maybe traditional ITS or software procurements in what you're seeing right now?
I think it kind of goes back to what I said earlier in that AI stands to touch so many different aspects of what an agency might need. I sure don't see somebody walking in the door of their procurement office and say, hey, I need to procure some AI. It's perhaps more going to go in the direction of, I need a tool that can help me identify incidents on roadways easier, or help us manage traffic signal operations, or perhaps it's maintenance of traffic signals. And it's reasonable that AI could be a part of helping that tool's success, but it's not like you want to go out and buy AI.
Right. Well, and it's interesting. Speaking about buying AI, we talk about vendors, right? You've got a number of existing vendors that are selling into the transportation space, and pretty much every one of those is now an AI company, right? How could you not be in this world? And then you've got a whole raft of other companies, AI companies, if you will, including the big tech companies that see transportation as a big opportunity to say, hey, we can help there, which is great too. But how do you sort of differentiate, or how would you suggest people differentiate? How do you know that an AI vendor from the outside actually gets transportation, or how do you know that a transportation vendor actually gets AI?
I have more recently been concerned when a vendor comes in and sits down, so to speak, and says, tell me about the challenges you face. That to me is a bit of a red flag, because I'm not sure they appreciate the breadth of what DOT deals with, experiences, has to respond to. And so when the question is very big and broad like that, I get concerned about their understanding of this industry. If their opening line, so to speak, is somewhat more pointed at a technology or a function, or if it's pointed at a situation that perhaps they experienced, or perhaps that they associate with our experience, I appreciate that, as it might have required them to do a little bit of homework in advance.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. A little personal anecdote. I do a lot of selling for a living, and one of the things they say in sales is you should do more listening and less talking. But to your point, you need to set the stage correctly and make sure you convey enough credibility and that you actually understand, rather than just walking in with a blank sheet of paper and saying, tell me about all of your problems in life. I'm sure I must be able to solve some of them. So speaking of vendors, and you have many conversations with many vendors, like what red flags, other than being unprepared, are there any other things that have just sort of clanged or made you think, wow, these people just truly don't understand transportation? Any funny stories or things about vendors that that you're okay with sharing?
That's going to be a hard one for me to respond to. The thing that gets my attention now, though, that is something of a red flag, is when the salesman, so to speak, says, I have this thing that I want to sell you, and it's got AI in it. Now, I know it's expressed more elegantly than I just did to you.
Sometimes.
But yeah, well, yeah. But when it's presented that way, I become suspicious, because who's to say that there is AI in the thing you're trying to sell? Who's defining what AI is? No, really. How different is the thing you're trying to sell from the version you sold last year, other than the claim that it has AI in it?
Yeah. Yeah, makes perfect sense. So let's extend we just crossed over into 2026. Let's look 5 years out, just to pick a number. Like 5 years out, what part of transportation will be so obviously AI powered that, you're just looking at, of course it's that way, that maybe we can't see as clearly today, but that 5 years from now will just be blindingly obvious? Care to make any predictions?
I will go out on a limb. I think it stands to be the world of design, designing a road. I think the design space is already heading in a very fundamentally different direction that is emerging, that is happening. And so I would suggest that the door is open in that space to not simply embrace the digital delivery concept, but that AI could be a useful means to help evaluate lots of different options or alternatives, which so much of that world is called upon to evaluate. Well, I like this, but could you do it a little bit differently right here? And I think that AI stands to be able to do a decent job of helping to identify those alternatives or caveat them or describe limitations associated with them like that.
It's interesting, and I have to caveat this as well. I have not spent a ton of time doing the actual design, so both of us are a little bit looking over the fence, to use your analogy, at that world. But hearing you say that, I hadn't really thought about it until now. It's so often the design side of things, the digital twin is the thing that comes up. There's a lot to that, but the oversimplified description of a digital twin is, okay, instead of creating just a set of plans, you actually have a digital representation of that, which is great and has its benefits. But both of those are sort of the end result, right? The plans or the digital twin is at the end of the process you just described, right? There's so much to get there that takes years, and whether it be environmental or right-of-way acquisition or other kinds of permitting or dealing with NEPA issues and those kinds of things, all of that is, has to be dealt with before you ever get to the plans or before you ever get to the digital twin, or at least alongside those things. And so it's interesting to hear you say that, and maybe digital twin is just one piece of a much larger puzzle on the design side, because that's certainly where DOTs spend the bulk of their time, energy, money is designing and building things, right?
It is, and it is amazing to me the timeline associated with that, and the opportunities to integrate data that the agency receives over the course of that timeline. Like, I mean, we talk. And perhaps even as I'm talking about this, I have in my head this image of plans and things like this big stack of paper. But that just gets you to the beginning of the construction.
Right.
During construction, well, stuff changes. Hopefully not much, but stuff changes. And during construction, the agency receives information from the contractor about what they're going to construct, or what they are constructing. Here's information about the pipes we're going to put in. Here's information about the asphalt that we just put down or the concrete that we just poured. Here's information about the signs that we're going to use or the traffic signals that we're going to build. And that information, which is really useful information, other than a check to make sure that it meets our specifications, how is that used? All that information, it meets our specs, check.
It just sits somewhere, right? I mean, it goes into a repository and probably is not used very much, yeah.
But it could help us as you move out of that construction into the operations and maintenance.
There you go.
Gives us
sequencing.
It could give us insights.
Yeah, design it, build it, operate and maintain it, and obviously a continuous thread of information data, if you will. The better you do that, then the more likely you are to be successful. Now that makes perfect sense. So basically, you're giving sort of recommendations. So let's think about prioritization. And if you were advising a DOT commissioner or director today, what's the first AI investment? They say, hey, I really want to get on with AI. I'm ready to make an investment. What would be the first AI investment that you would suggest they greenlight?
I would encourage them to give their staff access to one of the popularly known LLMs, and encourage staff to use it, to try it out. I envision that there's lots of folks at DOTs that are struggling to figure out, what can I do with it? I hear of all these great, amazing things that AI can do for me. But no, really, if I'm staring at the input screen, the prompt screen of an LLM, it's kind of intimidating because there's nothing there. How do I know what to type in? How much detail do I need to type in? How specific do I need to be? At the same time, I don't want to get in the way of its apparent power. And so I think access and encouragement.
Access and encouragement. That's great. And where that very logically leads, and I know you must deal with this as part of your AI governance committee inside of GDOT, is, okay, what could go wrong? How do we stay compliant? How do we comply with everything from just regulatory requirements to federal funding requirements to open records requirements, those kinds of things. And there are things like with any technology that can go wrong. How do you think about the positives? Wow, you've got that blank screen. You want to encourage people to use it. You hope and expect people to use it responsibly, however one defines responsibly. But then there's that other side. How do you balance the sort of, wow, we need to get people using it, with the, wow, things could go wrong if people start using it?
That is something that is certainly on my mind, on our mind. However, AI may be involved in the development of a work product for us, whether that's helping us draft a letter or much less helping us develop the design for some project. The work product is ours. And so we still have to take responsibility for it.
Yep.
The overall feeling that I get from others is caution and some skepticism. I joke that engineers, but you could say more broadly tech-minded folk, are inclined to be sarcastic, cynical, and conservative. And that set of things, whether you buy it or not, I think is relevant and useful in contemplating what AI stands to be, and will encourage a more measured use, certainly at these early stages. But still, as I said earlier, the product, however we got there, whether it's pencil on paper or a computer or AI generated, the product still is ours, and it's our responsibility.
It's interesting hearing you say that, which makes perfect sense. And I spent a lot of time talking to people outside of transportation as well. And one of the things that's pretty intuitive, I suspect, to those of us in transportation is the whole idea of a professional engineer. You put your stamp, literally, and I'm making the gesture of embossing or stamping, and historically that goes back to drawings or documents where, okay, I am the responsible professional in charge of this. Whether I had people working on it or not, and of course I probably did, but it's my responsibility. And if they made a mistake and I didn't catch it, it's my fault, right? I think that's a really useful example for more broadly than just even transportation. And I think the rest of the world largely does not have that model, right? Things get done. I don't know whose work product it is. Does it matter? Sometimes it doesn't. But clearly, when a world where AI can hallucinate or things can go wrong or people's lives are at stake, you want that higher standard. I think that's a great metaphor broadly. And does that mean that we're literally stamping AI outputs, not the outputs necessarily, but if you're submitting drawings or plans or something that have either a life safety element or some other reason to warrant that level of certification, it makes a ton of sense for me to extend that metaphor. So, John, when you look back on your career, what kind of innovation are you most proud of?
Years ago, I had a conversation with a guy. He was a computer system developer. He developed systems for traffic signals and such. And his remark at that time was, for years now, and understand he was saying this back in the 1980s, for years now, we have built roads aggressively and operated them passively. He said, we need to start operating them as aggressively as we have been building them. And I'm talking like literally, this conversation was in 1987, 1988, like that. And I think finally we're getting to a point where the operations side of this transportation business is becoming of significance.
That is a great line. Build aggressively, operate passively. I mean, that's even more remarkable that it happened back in the, like you say, the 80s. That's a great one. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So then, speaking of how far you've come in your career, we've come in our careers. Let's talk about younger leaders. Like, what advice do you give the younger leaders inside the department or elsewhere who are trying to drive change inside their organizations?
When you walk into a new place, take a period of time to not change the world, but instead to learn how that world is functioning, what matters, what are the levers, what's the impact of those different levers. The bottom line being, don't come in like a bull in a china shop, but instead do so with some deliberation.
Well, great. Okay, so we're basically out of time here. So this is great. We could talk probably for another hour or so, but we won't do that. We'll spare our listeners that much time. But I very much appreciate you joining us, John. It's been a great conversation, and I really appreciate your time and your perspective.
Thanks very much, Jim. I appreciate the chance to talk a little bit about where we are and maybe where we're going.
Excellent.
Thanks.
All right, well, this is At the Intersection. I'm your host, Jim Anderson, and today we talked with John Hibbard, Deputy Chief Engineer for the Georgia Department of Transportation. Stay tuned for further episodes where we talk to the leaders shaping adoption of AI across transportation. Thanks very much.